Charles Devon. Oh, sorry.
That's okay, Charles. Welcome everyone to today's Activity Strong Executive Edition webinar. For today's webinar, we are providing one free NAB, NCAP, NCCDP, NCTRC, and NZSRDT CEU credit. To be eligible for those CEU credits today, you do need to remain on this webinar for the full hour. At the end of the webinar, I will provide the required post-webinar CEU survey evaluation link in the webinar room chat box. And I will also send that email to you this afternoon. Please be sure to check your spam folder in case it lands there. The CEU survey must be completed by midnight Eastern time this Thursday, and certificates will be issued by email before the end of the day on Friday, June 9th. If you have any questions for us, please email webinars@linksenior.com. I'll now hand it over to Charles D. Vilmore, CEO and co-founder of Link Senior. Charles.
Thank you so much, Megan. Welcome, everyone. Welcome into this June 6th Activity Strong webinar executive edition. As a reminder, Activity Strong is this platform to acknowledge, empower, and educate senior living about the importance of resident engagement. And I'm very, very proud and excited to have Marvell back again with us in this special quarterly series about equity in aging. Today's topic is a passionating topic with amazing speakers that we'll be introduced in a second, but basically the person comes first, supporting LGBTQ plus older adults. As I mentioned, Activity Strong is this platform started by Link Senior. We do this work in partnership with Activity Connection, NAP, and NCAP. This is part of our values at Link Senior. Some of you might be aware of our Old People Are Cool campaign. You know, that stems from the fact that we're not a fan of segregation based on age. We think that everybody is cool, including our elders, and obviously Activity Strong, because we believe that activities is essential to senior living and the well-being of our older adults. A little bit of background about Link Senior. We are a resident engagement platform for senior living. We touch the life of 50,000 older adults through amazing organizations. And we're proud of our work. It's all about augmenting what teams try to do in supportive living. And we have a clinical study that backs our work. We are clinical evidence-based, and if you have any questions, please reach out. We'd be more than happy to discuss further with you. So today's topic, again, I think, Marvell, it's the third time that you're coming and discussing this topic with us, so thank you so much for coming back. You know, I think that some of the objectives obviously very much in line with the philosophy of this series that we have with you. But today specifically is how we discuss how the person comes first, right? And supporting this LGBTQ plus special audience, because it is special. And so with that, Marvell, I'll let you introduce you, give the opportunity to Robert and Carrie to introduce themselves, and let you take it away. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Charles. I thought I'd do something different, and I'll read my bio really slowly for the next 20 minutes. If that's no. It's really good to be back with everyone again. I'm actually in Norwood, Massachusetts, the day before Leading Age Massachusetts annual meeting. So I saw a couple folks in this neck of the woods that hopefully I will see tomorrow. Again, my name is Marvell Adams Jr. I serve as the founder and CEO of a company called W. Lawson, where we believe our mission to be create community and do good. And we've partnered with Link Senior to do this Equity in Aging series, having conversations about many different aspects of identity, inclusion, and equity and diversity. So, and I'm really, really delighted to join with me today two individuals that I'm a big fan of. One I am knowing more recently, and one a little bit longer. So I'll start with Robert. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. I was hoping that unless you had a need to read your bio for 20 minutes, if you could share a little bit about your organization, PHI, and the role you serve there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Marvell. And hi, everybody. It's good to be in a conversation today. I have a bit of a cold, so my voice is going to sound a little bit scraggly. So I'm the Executive Vice President of Policy at PHI, and we are a national organization that focuses on strengthening the direct care workforce, so predominantly home care workers, nursing assistants, and residential care aides, who support older adults and people with disabilities in a broad range of long-term care settings. I oversee specifically our advocacy and our education work. And prior to PHI, I worked for SAGE, which is a national organization that supports LGBTQ older adults. And I did similar work promoting public education, but also advocating for policy reform. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Great. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. And second, Carrie, who I've known for a couple of years now, and just it gets better with every week and month that goes by knowing you, Carrie. So if you could tell our friends today joining us your organization, the company that you serve, and the role you play.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good to see you out there. Thanks for joining. My name is Carrie. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Embodied Labs. I'm also a public health educator and a medical illustrator by training. And then I became a caregiver in my teens and my young adult years for my mom. She got diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease in her late 40s. And she lived with Alzheimer's for about 12 years after that. And so I was for a while in my early 20s her primary caregiver alongside my dad. And so Embodied Labs is a company that was born out of really wanting to better support caregivers and also bring the human elements of who all of us are, distinct from a diagnosis or an attribute, but to say, how do we honor the human, sometimes called a patient or a resident. And so I have my kind of early days suit. This is a super high-tech wearable here. Apple would be proud. It's a pair of glasses, and they are plastic, and the left sides are taped off. As I was working to hire my mom's first caregivers, she had this left visual field deficit, and it was a mouthful to say, but when we put on the glasses, we could understand that it was the left side of her body that she couldn't protect and we should walk on, or she could only see us if we came from the right, or like at mealtime, she'd eat exactly half of her plate of food. So we'd have to turn it for her to finish her food. And so now at Embodied Labs, what we do is we use fully immersive experiences, which can happen inside a VR headset or just on your browser without any extra tech. But we put caregivers, professional caregivers and families members like I was, in the perspectives of different older adults and care situations so that they can see through the eyes of who they're caring for. And we do that by blending live action film in an interactive game engine. So you're actually driving choices and branching narratives as you embody these different perspectives and lived experiences. And through that, we're able to holistically reflect not just someone's diagnosis with Alzheimer's disease, but maybe what their cultural approaches to care are, how that impacts their life, their family, a lot of dynamics that make humans who we are. So it's an honor to be here today with all of you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. But, you know, I'm really glad you shared the context and the background that brought you to the work, because it really is not only an intimate part of your past, but also really gives us an indication of why your work is something you're so passionate about. You know, Robert, I didn't get a chance to ask you, so I'll circle back around, but what brought you into this work? You've clearly done advocacy and really been an individual, a champion for those that are serving older adults and for them to be seen with the humanity that older adults are seen, at least that we strive for. So what got you into this field?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I actually first became politicized in college. It became something, an issue that both LGBTQ issues, but also broader issues around higher education access, I think were my initial interest. In 2010, I was working actually in philanthropy in the LGBTQ rights world. And I came across a press release that had been issued by the US Department of Health and Human Services. And what the press release noted that they had just awarded a grant to establish what would become the National Resource Center on LGBTQ aging. And so through contacts, I connected with the president, Michael Adams, who is still there. And I ended up working in the LGBT rights world through the aging lens at SAGE for about 5 years. At the time, my parents were actually in their 70s. And I was living in New York, they were in Colorado. And it was clear to me that the system that I thought would be in place as they aged and as we needed support to support them, that it really wasn't in place, that it wasn't well funded, that it was dysfunctional, it was confusing. And my interest in understanding of long-term care wasn't at the level that I think all of us should have. So it became my life mission to really understand what is long-term care, how can we ensure that it's more affordable, more equitable, more accessible, and how do we think about it both from a person-centered angle for clients, for residents, but also from a worker-centered angle, so that the workers who are really sustaining the system, all employees, have the necessary resources and training to really succeed in their roles.
Gotcha. Wow. Thank you, Robert. It's amazing to hear those stories of how we came into be. So, you touched on something that intrigued me, particularly as we talk about LGBTQIA plus older adults, but also understanding that many of the individuals that may care for those older adults, and we also consider them a part of the community. And so I'd be curious, and maybe I could start with you, Robert, on this. You touched on a couple barriers or pressing issues, but can you give the audience a sense of what do you see as kind of the more difficult issues around LGBTQ plus older adults, what they face, whether that might be with their intersectionality of their race, their ethnicity, their immigration, they may be immigrants or other marginalized groups, but what do you see as some of the challenges and barriers that they face?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of level setting, what we can learn from the research, what we can discuss today, one is that just numbers alone, researchers estimate that there are about 2.4 million LGBTQ people aged 65 and older. And when you broaden that scale to include people aged 50 and older, it's about 7 million. As with the rest of the population, that number will double by 2040. And so it is a sizable and rapidly growing population. LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and other sexual and gender identities. And some of the most pressing issues that the research is showing, I mean, certainly profound health disparities. We see, for example, high rates of cardiovascular disease, dementia, HIV and aging, diabetes, et cetera, the kinds of chronic conditions that often require the most clinical and social support. These are disproportionately high among LGBTQ people. And it's even higher among transgender and non-binary people and among people of color. And what's important to reference there is that it's because of a lifetime of discrimination that many of today's older people have lived through. I mean, these are generations of people who lived through the 20s and 30s when homosexuality was deemed a mental illness that wasn't actually taken out of the diagnostic manual until the 1970s. They were persecuted and often fired from their jobs with no legal recourse. And even though there are legal protections now in many ways, it still happens every day, right? And this is a generation that went through Stonewall and the HIV/AIDS epidemic. It was an organization that saw radical shifts in how people understood sexuality and gender identity. And yet, despite all the progress we've made, today's LGBTQ older adults, embody the health disparities and the economic insecurity that anyone who would have lived through that would be embodied. And they continue to face discrimination and differential treatment in everyday life, in residential settings, and under the law, especially in certain states.
Yeah. It reminded me, I was having a conversation with a colleague just a few days ago, and like many organizations, there are more broader conversations in the open and actually talking about issues around equity, and particularly with being Pride Month, some are more focused this time of year than others. But the conversation I had with my colleague was, as they were talking with residents, they discovered, they had one resident who was an older adult, male, who was gay, and everything that he'd learned was that something was really wrong with him. And so he even went through electroshock therapy of trying to cure what was he told to be an ailment or something that was a defect of him, and knowing that that is the commentary that many older adults grew up with, and really only sometimes finding in later in their life that they can be more open about who their identity. Carrie, I was thinking about your perspective that you could bring, particularly through embodied labs, of understanding, as caregivers, as those working in this space, as activity professionals, we never want to do harm. That is the absolute opposite of what everything we do for our service and our work. But inadvertently, we can be doing things that are harming the LGBTQ community, particularly older adults. Can you give a perspective on what that might look like and how we could be sensitive to actually navigating those potential pitfalls of inadvertently harming?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm thinking about some of the work that Embodied Labs did in wanting to be able to tell the stories of LGBT older adults, and doing that, in the way that when we create, we co-create. So when we're building the kind of scripts and interactive stories, we have lots of people at the table, subject matter experts that represent these stories that we're building. And so I guess in particular, we created an experience. So all of our labs, we name them because we are not an attribute or a diagnosis. We are a person with a name. So this experience called the Eden Lab told the story of a trans older adult, someone who had transitioned in their older years, so after retirement age. This was a trans woman, and this story was a combination of a couple of individuals who had come to an Embodied Labs event and really inspired the Eden Lab, and said, we want to be able to share our story. There's this gap here. And so that was part of the Eden Lab, became embodying the perspective of this person as they went from being 5 years old to, in about a 15-minute immersive experience. You're age 5, you're in the 50s to the 70s to present, to being married, to your wife, coming out to your wife, to your children, to transitioning. And I think as that's one part of that Eden Lab. There's another part that integrates more experiences of, we chose other characters of profiles of being lesbian and gay, and in home care settings and senior living. But I want to focus on the Eden Lab, that first experience a little bit, because now that it's been on our platform and in use, we have Embodied Labs serves academic institutions, training healthcare providers to be We are in government like the VA and state and local departments of health and human services, area agencies on aging. And we're also in like senior living, home care as staff training. And one of the things that comes up commonly is that when you embody Eden's story, you're really embodying the story of a white trans woman, and the umbrella of LGBTQIA is so diverse in and of itself, and the histories of different cultures and time periods are complex. And so I guess in sharing one story, we can't say we've now experienced what it's like to be trans, or it's just one lived experience that if not debriefed and contextualized the right way, I think to your question of inadvertent harm, can be silencing to other stories. So I'll pause there and maybe hand it back to you, Marvell.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Kira, because I have been lucky enough to experience a couple of the experiences within Embodied Labs, including the Eden experience. And what stuck with me, I think it's been over a year since I was able to experience it, was when Eden was younger as a child. And I think being in the virtual reality and being able to experience playing with, I think it was a doll, and to have your parent come in the room and feel them kind of chastise you and standing above you, which I think we can all relate to in some fashion, whether we're trans, cisgender, but we can understand that relationship with our parent and being chastised. But it really stuck with me because, that was Eden showing themselves. And so when you speak about inadvertently, harming folks and being kind of stuck in our own old mental models, it really gives that empathy that I really appreciated. When I think of the organizations and individuals that are out there doing really good work, Robert, I was curious if you had any thoughts on organizations that you've seen do form model practices around supporting LGBTQ plus older adults, or even what those suggestions or recommendations might be on how to do that well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a number of organizations and models come to mind, but I'll just reference a few. I'm a little biased, but I would certainly highlight SAGE, which is a national organization that provides services and advocates with and for LGBTQ plus older adults. They have affiliates in various parts of the country that do the same. And what they do is specifically, they try to understand kind of various systems that are shaping the lives and the well-being of LGBTQ older adults, whether it's public policy at the state, local, and federal level, and a variety of policies that shape this population, to the kinds of services that older people need every day, that unfortunately many LGBT older people often find if they go to their local senior center, or if they access their local aging services, they're not welcoming, they're not accessible in a way that's friendly to their lives. And so those services create a different type of community and support. A second model is that we have seen a number of housing developments, a lot of affordable housing developments develop in the last few years that are specific to LGBTQ older adults. And that's a nice way to make sure that we're creating an environment where people who are able to and choose to live in those environments have that approach, recognizing that we need to make sure that regardless of where you live, that you have the right support that you need. The final point I'll mention is that I'm fortunate enough to be on the advisory board for a project called the Long-Term Care Equality Index, which is being run by the Human Rights Campaign and SAGE. And it's an index that where in the current iteration, 200 senior living settings participated, and they agreed to work with the two organizations and also be assessed to the extent to which they are LGBTQ friendly in their policies, in their practices, in their training, et cetera. And it's a great model because it looks holistically at what a senior living environment should embody. Everything from cultural competence training, LGBTQ cultural competence training for staff, visitation policies, non-discrimination policies, public advertising and marketing in the community, et cetera. And then in doing so, it creates a benchmark and a range of best practices that hopefully other senior living centers can embody.
Wow. You know, it harkens back or takes me right back to a moment where I felt a misstep, or at least inadvertently could have caused harm, where I was leading a community, and we before SAGE accreditation existed, there was a couple that lived there, two women, and one was a teacher still in the county, and her spouse lived, in the community as well. And it was during the time that marriage equality came to the DC, Maryland area. And so they were going to get married on the campus of the retirement community. And I was just like, so ahead of myself, excited, like, that's so wonderful. And like, we should really talk about this, and I bet you like the Washington Post would want to, be interested in it. And I'm talking to the individual that was the teacher still. And she never kind of looked like I was expecting her to look. You know how you get this thing where you're like, I'm really excited about this thing, and why aren't you excited about it? And she just goes, Marvell, I still work, and the people at the school don't know that I'm gay, and I don't care to be open about that with my workplace. And I could just feel like my stomach just turned, because of course, I mean, not of course that she would feel that way, but of course, I should be asking and inquiring and understanding what her life is, as opposed to thinking, well, this celebration is something that we have to really tout so that everybody can see how great it is. And so, that inadvertent harm, or at least walking up to the edge of it, is something that anyone can find themselves needing to learn through and work through that uncomfortable moment. Carrie, I'd be curious to hear, what lessons have you learned in your work when it comes to supporting LGBTQ plus residents, or individuals that are supporting them, that are a part of the community and trying to be inclusive and open?
Yeah, I think the benefits of having these immersive experiences and in the ways that we model this, it's like, how can we share these experiences? So it's not just about you, Marvell, putting on this headset and going through this experience. It's a lot of times projecting what you're seeing in that headset to a room of 25 new staff being put through orientation. And then it becomes a conversation during and after that experience between you and your peers, and it creates a safe kind of common language to be able to say, well, that happened in this experience. I can point to that and have a question that I feel like I think psychologically safe asking in the group. So yeah, maybe one thing that I've just seen kind of in the framework of a shared immersive experience is, using the same example of Eden, where in one case there is someone that felt very angry that that there is an assumption of this embodiment of being trans, but that became a conversation. Well, why did it make you angry? What would it look like? And that became something that that group could talk about and listen to each other better. And that, we as a company and a team could learn about and say, well, how do we incorporate this into what we build and keep co-creating? I think that in the pandemic, embodied labs for some of our academic customers became a credit that they could count as clinical hours. So it was hard for students to get into clinics to do those in real life hours. And so when I just remember hearing some feedback from nursing students saying like, wow, I was never really exposed to LGBT individuals growing up. I came from a religious family. This gave me the ability to better understand a perspective I've never heard of or even thought of. Someone else said, you know, wow, I didn't think about through time all the different interactions someone might have where they're coming out, for example, to their children and what that might have felt like. And then even very recently, Vanderbilt has a program for nursing students. It's a master's program. And there was, I think, a discussion that wound up leading to someone coming out, feeling comfortable coming out as trans to their classmates as a part of that. And I think, you know, those are just a few of those powerful ways that I think sharing lived experiences together is where we can start to build the bridges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's astonishing how much little it can take to provide that psychological safety in some instances, and how much more it can take in others. You know, Robert, in thinking about the work at PHI and really supporting the individuals that are supporting the services and supports for older adults, you know, what would your advice or recommendations be for organizations, for providers, in ways that they can support individuals that are part of the LGBTQIA plus community, and so that they perhaps can gain that psychological safety, or at least feel a sense of inclusion and belonging with the organization?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a few pieces of advice that I would offer. I mean, first, I think it's really important to become more knowledgeable about what LGBTQ issues entail. And we've talked about a number of the issues here in this call, and there are many more. There are quite a few curricula out there that do a good job of describing and training entities and programs that can be hired to help everyone from the C-suite to executives and managers to frontline staff understand kind of the broad realities of LGBTQ older adults, recognizing that every individual has their own personal story as well. For example, I think of a program called Sage Care, which is run by Sage, which is a training program. It's an evidence-based training program that has trained probably tens of thousands of providers at this point on these issues. And it's a great baseline for making sure that we understand who they are. I think policies and protocols are critical in any setting. So making sure that there are non-discrimination protections, especially if you live in a state where those protections are not as strong on gender identity in particular. I think it's important to have visitation policies and resident engagement protocols that make sure that people are able to engage with each other and have their friends and their family members visit without any kind of bias or harassment. And I think it's important to celebrate the culture and the moments of LGBTQ history, whether it's October as LGBTQ History Month or Pride Month, or any other key moment that diverse people who are LGBTQ experience, so that we're not just thinking about their needs and their challenges, but we're actually thinking about their contributions and their strengths as well, right? All of us are multifaceted people, and we should think about people in that way.
Yeah, I've been listening to and reading a book called DEI Deconstructed by a person named Lily Zhang, and they give a spectacular action biased way of really looking at how do you create safe environments, how do you actually actualize a plan in place and move forward with actions. But one of the things that really stuck that Lily said is, you know, at the end of the day, you're also talking about, even if you have in the workplace identities that are completely monochromatic, that within those individuals side by side, there are differences because of the lived experience that someone may have. And that is no different than someone that has a marginalized background or experience. That two trans women working in a retirement community can have just as many differences as a Black male, you know, and a white woman might. And so when thinking about and understanding how those identities come into play, you know, Carrie, I'd be curious to hear a bit more of how you view the work of Embodied Labs and your own personal journey of, you know, where do you hope for, you know, in the coming years? Because as we've seen, you know, there's more and more focus and attention from many different areas on the community. And, you know, what types of things do you hope for yourself or for Embodied Labs going forward for the community?
Yeah, well, I hope we can tell more stories. I think being able to share more from that rich umbrella. I mean, to me, that it's like crazy. It's one acronym because each part of it, there's so much there. And so I hope we can elevate the lived experiences and the histories of more of the community. And I hope we can continue to dig into how to build bridges and conversations that allow for people to learn and to come into this conversation that maybe are afraid to or don't know how to, or have beliefs that counter the community. I think in senior living, you know, one role that I've now taken on professionally outside of Embodied Labs is being on boards, and I'm on one for a senior living community that's faith-based. It's made me open my eyes to where there's some intersections and challenges sometimes in faith-based care. And in this country, a lot of our healthcare system was built with origins of faith. And so actually I was, Robert, talking with Sadia from Sage Care we ran into each other at a conference, and I said, Sadia, how do you navigate a conversation like that? And you know, she said, you know, we're all here to give great healthcare. Like, that's what our mission is as senior services providers. And so if we stay focused on that core, someone's identity is a part of them, but it doesn't change that is, you know, our calling, our the work we're doing. So I just hope we can see how to take complexities of respecting the faith-based organizations and the history of those and bring that together with some of these issues so that they can coexist in a way that brings equitable healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you, Carrie. You know, Robert, I want to give you the chance to answer a similar question, sense of what do you hope for, you know, in the coming years for the community, particularly from a policy standpoint, you know, with the world in which you work. Are there policy advocacy moments or things that you really would love to see implemented from a policy standpoint that could be inclusive and supportive of the LGBTQ plus community?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are seeing a growing number of policy proposals that are specific to caregiving, whether it's family caregivers or direct care workers, or more broadly, the long-term care system. There is a growing recognition that as a country, we are aging, and that we also, people with disabilities need services and supports that are affordable, accessible, and equitable. And I think within that discussion, there needs to be a conversation about, and what are the unique needs and aspirations of LGBTQ older adults, whether you're a direct care worker or a family caregiver or an older adult or a person with a disability, right? What are the unique challenges? What are the opportunities to ensure that everyone can access the kind of care that they deserve? We're seeing more momentum at this point at the state level, because I do think that oftentimes it's states that lead the way, and then we see the federal approaches kind of come in next. But we did see a recent executive order this spring that where the president asked various federal agencies to use their authority and really improve home care in particular, and also improve direct care jobs. So I think that there's some hopeful, I think, momentum in the regards of caregiving that we can build on.
Wow, thank you for that. It's it really sticks with me that both of you keep coming back to kind of the human element, which makes sense. You know, everything we do really, and no offense against technology, Carrie, but you know, we still are humans caring for humans, and everything that we have that's tangential to that is really supporting still that human being able to have that interaction, or educating and empathizing, giving the ability to empathize that human with another person. You know, many of the individuals that are on our session today are activities professionals, directors, activity staff, managers, leaders in the organization. And so every fabric of a community certainly can be different. I'd be curious to hear what either your thoughts are on you know, the ways that an individual can just take the first step. Because I think in some organizations that there may be not necessarily a fear, but not necessarily a safe space that of being more intentful of including residents that are LGBTQ. Anything that you would give advice-wise for, you know, an activities professional, what would be a first good step if they were really working to be more inclusive?
There's probably a few safer steps that an activities professional can at least spark the conversation with. Certainly a lot of residents, a lot of environments have movie nights, for example, right? And finding a movie that broaches the subject of LGBTQ issues in a way that's, you know, softer than, say, a more aggressive documentary, for example, right? Though those can often be very helpful as well. That's a nice way to sort of test the waters and get a sense of the reaction, and ideally, you know, create an environment where LGBTQ people themselves will see themselves reflected. So I would encourage something like that.
Very nice. Carrie, would you add anything to that?
I was thinking one of the communities I look up to is Chicago Methodist Senior Services. And I guess I remember, I think it was during June a couple years ago, their art therapist did a project to, I think, create kind of a mural or some, it wasn't a mural that they wound up hanging up because there was some conversation about like what that would mean, but it was an opportunity for any resident who wanted to be able to contribute to creating this art that was to represent Pride Month and honor Pride Month. So it wasn't a requirement, but it was an invitation. And I think activities, you know, are such a cool thing because they're you're there together, co-creating, you're sharing an experience. So maybe bringing something tangible to the table that represents the community with people being able to opt into it. And just that visibility alone is a step towards giving people who maybe aren't ready to come in some insight into the conversation.
Yeah, I like I really like the point of the visibility piece of it. You know, Robert, at the beginning you mentioned that more communities are being created. And I'm not far from Boston and Norwood, Massachusetts, and so not far from the Pride, the affordable housing development that's being built there that's centered around LGBTQ inclusiveness. So there are things that are happening in our field that certainly give more energy to an inclusion environment. And and thinking of that aspect of that of equity, you know, when we go from a design aspect and think of how do we create community that is inclusive, you know, there could be many schools of thoughts on how you do that. But Carrie, you'd made the point that also some organizations, particularly in the not-for-profit space, have a faith-based tradition or have a tradition that has not historically talked about or put center LGBTQ issues. And that's not a broad stroke that I'm brushing with, but more so giving the indication that it may be harder in some organizations to have these conversations than others. But some of the topics that you brought up, some of the points you've made, I think really give everyone a good start, particularly as you looked at there are other organizations out there that you can lean on, but also with SAGE being such a great advocate for this space. I'd be curious to just pause a minute and Robert and Carrie, wonder if you had any questions yourself in this space that you're curious about around LGBTQ inclusion. You know, when I think of just how far it feels it's come in my 20 years of being in this field to being where it was, it wasn't that it wasn't talked about, it wasn't even thought of something to talk about, to being more talked about, to now having more inclusion in communities that are actually centered around LGBTQ plus community as well as accreditation. You know, what questions come to mind for you when you think of the work that's being done out there and perhaps what our future holds?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Carrie.
I guess one question I have is what don't we know? I think, you know, to your point, Maribel, we've come a long way. We're talking about things that weren't talked about. But it's still, you know, it's an underrepresented group of people with so much probably more to be talking about. So maybe that's my first question is like, what are the things that aren't talked about? Who are the people that are still kind of that invisible people, because we're not yet talking about enough things that bring them into the conversation. I'll pause there and hand it back to you, Robert.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was thinking in the realm of what are senior living environments prevented from doing depending on where they live and where they reside. What are the kinds of limitations that they might have because of a state law or a local law? And even if you have an energized team of people working within an environment, can they show that movie? Can they pass that policy? Like, what's the permission there? And if they have wide permission, what's preventing them? Because I think if we can get to those barriers, we can probably open up the opportunities as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow, well put. Sorry, Megan, are there any questions in the chat that you'd like to pose to our panel?
Yes, we have several that have come in. Thank you, Marvel. So the first one here is from Brianna, and it says, are the higher rates in diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and other illnesses attributed to trauma or higher levels of stress throughout life? I'm just trying to understand why there are so much higher rates. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think it depends on the study, but in general, when you look at the broad literature on health disparities, it's usually a few factors. One is access to healthcare, and that is the argument there is simply that because of that there's concurrently research showing that LGBTQ people across their lifespan might have less access to healthcare, or might have been afraid to approach their doctor, their nurses, et cetera, because they fear discrimination, being outed, et cetera. The other reason is, I think, what you just mentioned, which is trauma, the impact of discrimination, of mental health, also impacting physical health. And what we see is that the disparity, it's across the lifespan, but it continues into older age. So a lot of older people are also aging into environments where the discrimination is quite profound, except the barriers are just very different when it comes to being an older person.
Mhm. Thank you, Robert. Phenomenal answer.
Thanks, Robert.
Megan?
Yes, so the next one here is directed towards Carrie. This is from Adam, and he said, would be very interested in how Carrie measured the effectiveness of the program. I believe this relates to the Eden program, Carrie.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, there's a couple ways we evaluate our embodied labs experiences. One is we have these customizable pre and post surveys that we've worked with, like, our academic customers, and saying, what do you want to learn and kind of understand from who's going through these experiences. We're actually just about to kick off in the state of California. We were awarded a grant from the Department of Aging, the State Department of Aging here, to bring embodied labs to 100,000 informal caregivers. And through that, there's a research partner that the state's working with at UCSF, but we have two partners. One is at Denver University, a research lab that looks at caregiving issues specifically. And we've created a way to now look at using validated scales. So we're going to use the caregiver competency scale. There's also a caregiver burden scale. And we're going to look at how this has impact on those different metrics. But I think it's a really important question that you're asking, because when we think about the case for the business case for why this matters, this conversation, and why being able to provide adequate, equitable care to LGBTQ individuals exists, it's quality of care. And we want to be able to show that through these trainings, we're improving the caregiver's ability to be confident, be competent, that we're decreasing caregiver burden and stress, all things that we know impact our health and the workforce that's delivering this. So at the same time, as an entrepreneur, kind of business owner, building education in a way that is relatively new. Simulation training isn't new, immersive environments aren't new, but assessing them for this purpose of training caregivers, and especially in the DEI space, which Embodied Labs has primarily focused on issues around health conditions like Alzheimer's, or care transitions like going from home to community. But for equity training through this modality, I think we need to be really cognizant and really partner with experts on evaluation tools, so that we know that as we're co-creating, we're doing that in a way that really is moving the needles we want to move. And to your earlier questions, Marvell, not inadvertently causing harm either. So both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, Well put.
Thank you.
Megan, did you have one more that you wanted to ask?
We do have one more here from Michelle, and this is for the full panel. And she's wondering if you can speak to making sure that we don't have a resident who is not yet open to sharing be the educator about these issues. It is not their responsibility to educate others unless that is something the person feels called to do, if the panel wants to take that.
That's a really good one. Robert, go ahead.
I think it's an excellent point. And for me, this speaks to the importance of the setting, prioritizing training and making sure that it's an ongoing, externally led conversation where all staff and residents are being trained on key issues, because not only is it not the responsibility of an individual to educate their person, but no one person can have the knowledge that explains the entire histories of a very large and broadly diverse set of people. So I think making sure that it's systematized, that there are validated external trainers, and that it's ongoing, so that maybe every 6 months, every year, et cetera.
And I think one of the reasons why Embodied Labs really fulfills this question that you're asking is that we're learning the stories of others and we're conveying them in a way that makes them accessible to others, that honors like those individuals' privacy and time, but can create like a repeatable way to understand a lived experience without putting the onus on those individuals to be doing that themselves.
Wow. Thank you both. I know we're coming to the end of our hour, but this has just been absolutely spectacular, Carrie and Robert. The depth of not only knowledge and experience you bring to this, but really the intimacy in which you offer it. Just thank you so much for continuing the work. One last final question I'll have for both of you is, we talked a great deal about the type of work that's happening in our space right now, the support and kind of the changes. What is there something that you'd like to share that might be what's next for Embodied Labs and PHI? Is there something on the horizon that you are excited to share or have out in the open?
Absolutely. I mean, what I'll share briefly is that this year we are partnering with the National Alliance for Caregiving, which is an organization that focuses on family caregivers, to launch an initiative that's about strengthening the relationship between family caregivers and home care workers. Together, they are often the front line of support for many people at home, yet they aren't necessarily trained or supported as a dyad. They're often trained separately, they're supported, et cetera. So we're trying to figure out what is the best way for both government and industry leaders to really build that relationship so that people at home have quality person-centered care, and of course, people across different identities.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I really love that. Carrie.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, we're excited about the work in California to bring Embodied Labs to 100,000 family caregivers and 5,000 direct care workers. We're also doing a Train the Trainers program to, in that group of direct care workers, upskill at least 200 of them to be facilitators of these trainings, so that the bridge building and the conversations around these experiences have that expertise of a direct care worker and leader. And we're also looking at how we build certification around emotional resilience and some of the things that come through this type of training. And to the person who asked about measurement and metrics, I'm really excited to see how we look at data and really understand how this translates to those quality metrics that move the needle.
Great. I'd be remiss in not sharing a little bit myself. I'm going to share my screen as some of the work that's going, because one of the things that's really come across a lot during our conversation today is that we all are actively working. This is not a passive thing when it comes to inclusion work. It's not passive when it comes to equity. And one of the things that my company has started is a fellows program that really focuses on longevity and inclusion. I won't go through all the details of the modules, but we're going to be launching in the fall and taking really our participants and the fellows and the cohorts through their own personal journey to explore what ways they'd like to really become more inclusive and how they can have a roadmap for doing that. If you're curious, feel free to visit our website or scan the QR code. We're going to be utilizing the book I mentioned earlier, Lily Zhang's DEI Deconstructed, as one of our core curriculum guides. But just really encourage each of you to realize that each of the panelists today, individuals at Link Senior and others at Sage, everyone started their journey at some point, and everyone hopefully is continuing their journey. And so just keep in mind that that is the biggest piece of this, that whether it's a small step or a large one, just taking that next step and continuing is really what this is about, being more inclusive and creating equity in aging. So just thanks again for the opportunity, Charles, and just glad to be with you again.
Yeah, Marvell, Robert, and Carrie, thank you so much for this really engaging conversation. I'll just echo what a lot of people are saying in the chat, which is that, well, for many, which probably includes me as well, you've made the next step slightly easier, right? So thank you very much for allowing to be part of such a, esteemed panel conversation. I'll be the first one to share that I think it's the first time that I'm hearing kind of heart-to-heart conversation like this, and so it means a lot to me personally. And I think that might be echoed from the panel, the chat here. Just a few things I'd like to share before we completely break, which is including, and as a follow-up to our conversation today, please, quote-unquote, audience, feel free to reach out to any of the panelists today. If you don't know where to start, an email is a great way to start, just with a question. If you don't know where to start, maybe contact Marvell about a new program that is about to be rolled out. If you don't know where to start, maybe just consider looking at the tip sheet that Marvell, in partnership with us, kind of took the time to create. And these are all good step, right? The most important, what I'd like to personally challenge you all is at least take a step, right? That's, I think, what a lot of us might be wanting to do and not knowing how to. So again, Marvell, Robert, Carrie, thank you so much for being with us, and it was really meaningful. For the audience, just a few announcements, which is that we are having our largest event of the year. It's going to be a party, like Palooza. For me, sounds like a party. And so we're having our Activity Strong Yearly Summit on June 27th. We have quite an amazing lineup. And I think that we have already more than 1,000 people registered. So it's going to be a big event, amazing speakers. And again, it's free. And we're doing this in partnership with Activity Connection, NAP, and NCAP. We also have a few other opportunities, which is one, we, for the first time ever, put up together this activity professionals demographic. So feel free to download it. Actually, Marvell does an interesting perspective on the diversity of that population. I'd love to get your insights on that. I'm just realizing that I could send that document to you. But then in terms of other learning opportunities, we are continuing to push for this idea of data and the importance of measuring engagement in our field. So we're very excited to we just updated that benchmark tool document that we launched earlier in 2023. In terms of webinars and learning opportunities, we have a special one for our Pennsylvania organizations, and that is all about dementia care. We're doing this in partnership with Julie Ackley of ACTS Retirement Communities. And early July, we are, for the first time, having Ola Konkanon, who's the CEO and co-founder, CEO and founder of Eldergrow. And her work is all around how nature enriches resident engagement. It's all about the therapeutic aspect of nature in senior living. So amazing work. as well. Thank you all for joining. And I'll say probably for the third or fourth time again, Marvell, Robert, Carrie, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. Take care.